Now it's my pleasure now to welcome keynote speaker, Dr. Tom Kariuki, the Director of the Alliance for Accelerating Excellence in Science in Africa, AESA, from the African Academy of Science. He's going to talk to us about the future of science in Africa, so thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. It's getting to the end of the day, so I'm the person between you and a good dinner, I hear. But I also hear the dinner is delayed, so don't be in a rush. So thank you to David for the invitation. So I got a quick email from David saying, come and speak at Cambridge Africa Day 2018. So I quickly replied. You know, there are some emails that come and you just feel you have to give a quick response. I did that for a number of reasons. First is because you don't really say no to Cambridge professors. Secondly, because this particular professor was also my PhD examiner. Thirdly, because I've collaborated with David. I worked on schistosomes for many years, and so did he. And so the elusive schistosomes, they remain elusive to this day, so we continue to engage on that front. And fourthly, also because David actually participates in a number of decision-making and review committees at the African Academy of Sciences. So here I am. I want to share with you some of the opportunities for support and scientific growth and partnerships in Africa. And I'm delighted to have my colleague here, Kevin Marsh, who's divides his time between the Academy and Oxford. Yes, Oxford, not Cambridge. He's here with me, and these are some of the things we have actually shared together at the Academy, and also some of the strategies we have. I am speaking in the UK, so I kind of feel I don't have to say much about Africa because, you know, there are many Africans in the room, and this is the UK, not somewhere else. So you do know a lot about Africa, going back hundreds of years ago. But I also do feel a bit compelled to say one or two things. Remind you that it's a very large continent. And sometimes the context and the nuances about how you actually make investments in Africa need to be seen with regard to that context. It really is sometimes forgotten that you can fit all these places in the map of Africa, including China and the United States, and somewhere, the UK somewhere, I think, fits nicely into Madagascar, I think. So it really is, it's a big continent. So everything we discuss about how we develop and how we invest, I think it should be seen in that larger context. But I also want to say something about a set of major interactions and transitions that have really shaped the continent and continue to do so as we look to the future of the continent, including, for example, health research related, for example, to malaria. And people like Kerry and others who've worked on malaria, Gordon, know these figures, and all of you as collaborators and partners know that we've made tremendous progress in terms of overcoming or beginning to reduce the burden of malaria on the continent. So in the last 15 years, there has been major decline in mortality. We have a long way to go. So the numbers are still, horrific, 400,000 dying every year. At the malaria meeting in Dakar a few weeks ago, there was a lot of discussion around the fact that we seem to have stalled. Brian, you remember that? I think it's a stagnation, not just in terms of making progress with overcoming the disease, but also a stagnation in terms of the investments that are required for us to really move towards elimination. And so we need to re-energize the conversations about how we actually move this field forward. But there has been good progress, and that's something to celebrate. There has also been good progress with regard to our awareness of the big killers currently on the continent. Unfortunately, awareness in this case is not translating into actual tangible investments to deal with the challenge of non-communicable diseases on the continent. And that really is a big thing happening. The probability of dying prematurely from non-communicable diseases in Africa has gone up, even in places that ordinarily you would not have thought of in that sense. And so this is, again, a major focus, and attention is required on SCDs as we move forward. I won't play you the slide, but this, it's just to remind you that we were all Africans, we are all Africans, and actually there will be more Africans in the coming years out of the continent. It will be a very crowded place by 2050. If you plan to be around, it will be a very crowded place. This is really because it's also an incredibly young continent. If you look at what's happening in places like the DRC and compare that with, for example, the slow growth in Western world, or even negative growth in some countries. Incredibly young continent. And many of the young people on the continent, you'll be living in cities that really has been a huge transition. I grew up in a part of rural Kenya that actually looked a little bit more than, like the picture on the left there. And this has changed immensely across the entire continent. So more and more people are now living in urban centers. But what sort of urban centers are we going to be living in? Are they the urban centers in the middle, or are they urban centers that look, look more like that? Because something like 40% of the people are now living in cities in the continent. But these cities are disconnected, they are crowded, they are costly, they are places where diseases can emerge, including cholera outbreaks. And so there is a big challenge of how we then address these challenges. Universal health coverage is one way for us to begin to really move towards addressing some of these challenges on the continent. There seems to be commitment, not least because this is a sustainable development goal that all African countries have signed up to. There seems to be some level of investment that has been committed by the World Bank and others, but there is also a full understanding that much of this funding for achieving universal health coverage must come from the continent. And there is, in a sense, a way in which Africa can pay its bills moving forward, because economies have been growing. Some of the fastest growing economies are on the continent. We need to start paying some of the bills, and we need to start taking more ownership of some of these programs. And part of the work we do at the Academy is really to have these conversations. So accelerating the investment from African governments to help us achieve things like UHC. But we also know that technologies will be critically important to move us in that direction where we can actually achieve some of these sustainable development goals. Technologies, including e-health or telemedicine, including genomics, all those can help us to arrive quicker at the SDG targets. Now, with regard to the challenge and the burden of disease, so one of the critical issues, and has been highlighted throughout the day, is this lack of capacity. And if you have only 2% of researchers, it means you have a limited pipeline for research and development. It means that it's going to take you that longer to achieve the targets. Every one of us who are African, have done work in Africa, have had these partnerships, knows that it is really incredibly difficult to be a researcher on the continent. Imagine all the things you have to do just before you get to your science. You have, like have been pointed out today, find the funding, prepare the proposals, align your research, measure, manage, negotiate, including negotiations with customs officials who confiscate your reagents, organize your budgets. Visas are difficult to get by, even to visit your collaborators. And then at the end of that, you have to teach and train and mentor, and you still need to look for time to do your research at the end of that. So it really is incredible. So when you see a good paper, or when you see Kereshi Bare doing all these things, it really takes a lot to get things going. And many of you who work on the continent know that for a fact. And that's why, despite some of the investments, we still have very few researchers compared to anywhere else. So with only less than 200 researchers per million inhabitants compared to more than 4,000 here in the UK, our output from the continent is only 2% of the global scientific output. These are the things that need to change. And these are the things that the African Academy of Sciences that we feel we need to keep thinking about. So we think about three things as part of the Academy's work. We recognize excellence because we want to honor our leaders. We want to make sure that we are giving inspiration to younger generations. They can see people who actually have been through all these challenges, and they have overcome them, and they have established research groups, and they are, in some cases, even thriving as scientists on the continent. We then use these leaders to really focus attention on advisory functions, on partnerships. But I was hired by the academy to basically then put together a platform for implementing programs and scaling up the number of programs on key areas including health and well-being, sustainable energy, STEM, food security, climate change, water and sanitation. So those are focus areas for us moving forward. And we really have to focus on some of the things that have been very beautifully enumerated today. Building R&D environments that support vibrant research culture, that engender leadership, that are long-term, because none of this is going to happen overnight. Supporting innovations and science-driven entrepreneurial culture. Supporting rising research leaders to stay and to build their research careers in Africa. And to look at the entire landscape and ask questions around where are the critical gaps and what do we need to do to plug those gaps. So that it becomes a better environment for R&D. So those are some of the things we are really focused on. And we have created a number of programs across all these strategic focus areas. And we are beginning to see some impact of these investments. The second part of this is to really just share with you a few of some of the things that we feel are happening. But broadly speaking, it's to say, if you really want to make change on the continent, you focus on investing in people, investing in their places of work, investing in their programs of work, you can expect to get out products, practices, and policies like has been demonstrated throughout the day-to-day by the people who are actually doing this. So it's not a very complex thing, actually, if you think about it. Invest in people, their places of work, and their programs of work, and you'll get out some very good outputs. It will take time, of course, but that really is the formula that we want to do on the continent. Funding is at the center of this, and we are really grateful for our partners who have bought onto this idea and are investing and continue to make commitments. We have a number of programs that are currently where we're investing more than $130 million in terms of direct support to programs and institutions on the continent to work on everything from research for health to climate sciences, to strengthening the research environments, to innovations, to mobility increments. And as an example, we have a footprint in many places based on the number of grants we have given. Unfortunately, I have to apologize to Salova about Egypt not being part of Africa. It really is part of Africa, but I think one of the challenges we have faced at the academy is that we are also dealing with, yes, some aspect of decolonization that needs to come into these discussions around the fact that definitions around sub-Saharan Africa. It's something that really is in many of our partners' policies about where investments should be made. And we, as a Pan-African organization, want to see an approach that is truly Pan-African. But we're facing barriers in how we actually get our partners to change that mindset. But that's something we are determined to do, to change the mindset and to really rehabilitate all this reference about, because some of the challenges that we face in many parts of Africa are really common across the entire continent. So we want to take that approach. A big focus is leadership and rising stars. And one of the things I think we can all work together to do is to really support the best people, young people, to do the best science across the continent, whether it's basic or translational or clinical sciences, whether it is sciences outside of health in all areas. And that's some big investment. For a program like Delta's Africa, which is supported by Wellcome and DFID, and which we agreed with the Wellcome Trust that we would shift the management of Delta's program from Euston Road to Nairobi after we fulfilled certain conditions for shifting that center of gravity. And we really meant shifting the center of gravity in terms of managing the programs, in terms of how we monitor the grants, how the money flows directly to an African institution, of course with us making sure that the due diligence is done and that the capacities for managing grants is in those institutions. So this is a focus for us of how we are able to then create the mechanism, the environments for bringing more scientists. So collectively, and Gordon gave some figures for the Deltas program, Arizona is here. But collectively, if you look at all the 11 big networks across the continent that constitute the Deltas, the numbers are, quite impressive in terms of the masters, PhDs, postdocs. When we put these numbers with Kevin and when we were designing all this, I mean, I didn't quite believe we could actually recruit 100 postdocs within a year or two. Because everything I thought about the way African institutions were approaching postdocs was that, first of all, there were no career pathways for those postdocs. That may still remain the case in many universities. But also, was there a large enough pool to recruit from? And I think we have, that we've been proven that is truly correct. I mean, we have a large pool of people to recruit from there. Many people want to come back to the continent, and what Gordon said this morning is true, as long as they can be promised that they won't go hungry and they will do state-of-the-art research in an environment that is supportive of them. And so we've been very impressed by the way these numbers are going. We have a number of programs currently open, and so we're looking at a 4-year postdoctoral program with NIH. Well, guess what? The NIH is a huge campus, those of you who are there. There are something like 1,500, or 2,000 postdocs who are intramural. So who wants to take a guess how many are African? It's less than 20. And so there has been some discussion with the top leadership of the NIH to increase the number of Africans through a 4-year postdoctoral program that would allow them to spend 2 years in Bethesda and 2 years back home, where we would support them to reintegrate and to become part of an institutional setup in Africa. And we are currently reviewing those applications I think they're still open. But David has been supporting us with this regional initiative in science education, reviewing applications for another postdoctoral program with Carnegie Corporation Partnership. And hopefully we will keep expanding this through, for example, partnerships with the Royal Society. We are very excited by the fact that the Royal Society has such an incredible track record of fellowships, and the opportunity to partner with them, Brian, is really something we look forward to moving forward. But we also want to change a few things about how we work in Africa. So this is collaborations over the years between Africa and various partners in the West. Much of it, as you can see, is just there's very little that stops anywhere on the continent. It's really just direct linkages between the African institutions and the institutions in the North. The point was made in the panel discussion that there is, for example, knowledge, learning that could have been learned about the Ebola crisis if we were collaborating better and could transfer that learning to, say, West Africa from Uganda. But Ugandans don't ordinarily collaborate with people in Cote d'Ivoire, or with Guinea, or with Liberia, or with Sierra Leone. So we want to change that, and looking at, for example, Deltas, where we have all these networks, on One Health, on infectious diseases, on malaria, how are they collaborating across the continent is very, very important. So Deltas is in 21 African countries. It's 50+ institutions, at least 20 of them here in the UK. And so we want to see more of intra-African collaborations, and we are deliberately providing grants to support African scientists, for example, working in Anglophone, Francophone areas to partner, move around, give them support so they can develop a joint program of work. These are open calls on our website. We also want to see more South-South collaborations between Africa and India. We share a lot of challenges with India, and India is doing well in medical innovations, for example, and there is a lot of learning that can be done. We want to maintain, of course, very strong linkages with the UK, with Europe, with the US, with Japan, with everywhere else, because those are key ones for us and have really yielded significant outputs and really helped to train and to mentor and to make resources available. But I think we also want to see significantly more intra-African collaborations, because that's the only way we can utilize the limited resources more efficiently and really create the impetus that will lead us to some form of impact on common programs. The investments that we are making and our partners are making are also leveraging additional investments. And when I receive these annual reports, that's one of the things I want to see are these investments unlocking other additional support from various partners. The question of women in science is a global challenge, but in Africa it's particularly actually a big challenge. So if you take the small pool of African scientists, only about 22% of them are actually women. So it really is a huge challenge to get more women into sciences in Africa. And that's a study by UNESCO that actually came up with that number. And so one of the things we could do is to be very intentional and deliberate about how we actually advertise, form policies as a grant-making organization. So we need to make sure we are supporting people, whether they are taking time to go and start families, want to come back. So we've been very deliberate and very intentional about how we want to attract women. And we made it clear to our program managers managing these programs that they have to go beyond the usual calling to really make sure this is happening. Within the Delta's framework, I think we are getting there in terms of you take the overall 11 programs and the 1,000 people they have recruited. Those are the numbers, 508 versus 469 the last time I looked. If you take the climate sciences fellowships, we gave 100 fellowships for climate science work in Africa. 50 of them were men, 48 were female. And even smaller programs focusing on maternal, neonatal, and child health where we have actual parity. And this is something we will continue to monitor as we move forward. The other aspect that has obviously been a big one is institutional strengthening. How do you strengthen institutions? And the conversations we are having is the fact that it's one thing to focus on good research questions, but the thing that's going to make that productive is whether the research management environment and institutional support is in place. And so one of the things we are doing currently is to create tools to tell us the level of preparedness of institutions to be able to receive grants and to manage them and to make sure that their researchers are supported. So one of the tools is good grants financial practice. Financial governance is a major issue. It is one of those unspoken things, whether it is my discussions with funders like Simon Kay at the Wellcome Trust there, talking about how do we actually make sure that the funding that our partners make available is actually being utilized. Every dollar is going for the purpose that it was meant to do. And so what we have done now is we are making it a condition for our partners to go through this standard. It looks at the levels of preparedness with regard to procurement, financial management, HR, program governance and oversight, etc. And they can then measure themselves on the standard, and they can be at the level of bronze, silver, gold, or platinum. And this is not to sanction them. This is actually to say, if you are at the level of bronze and you really want to work with us, we can work with you to make sure that you actually go to the next tier. Could be silver, could be gold. And so that is taking off. And then the issue of critical gaps is one that I also think is one where the research environments have so many critical gaps in communication, in public engagement, in funding. One aspect, one way in which we are addressing this is to build this coalition of partners. Kerry mentioned about bringing private investors. There's very little private money in Africa going to R&D work. His is a great example of how you can get pharmaceutical companies. We are in conversations with 6 pharmaceutical companies on the aspects of translational and clinical research. And the question we are asking them, and getting 6 big pharma in one room is one thing, and then having a conversation with them is very interesting. But the question that came out of our conversations with them is, what would they need to see in Africa for them to be able to make additional investments in translational and clinical sciences? And one of the things they said, well, tell us what is there first. And so we told Dalberg, our partners, like the Dalberg Global Advisors, to give us some information on what is currently available. So they have mapped a number of capacities with regard to clinical and translational science centers in Africa. They've looked at 168 of them, and they have mapped out where those sites are. And this becomes then a basis of engagement, of saying, if you want to form a network of clinical and translational sciences capacities in Africa, here are some sites that may have that capacity, and you can start to look into them. And that's a critical aspect moving forward, but equally it is the issue of how we then share and publish So one of the things we are doing as Africans, and we continue to do this, is to leapfrog wherever we can. Unlike the UK, where you have a culture of, say, big corporations that really are very committed to the traditional setup of publishing, we can try new things. We can try open research. We can try to go straight into open peer reviews, open publishing, open science, and see how that works. Just like we did with mobile phones, we can leapfrog a little bit. And that's an experiment we want to do. And by creating the AES Open, and it's really taken off. In the last 2 weeks alone, more than 20 articles already published since we announced this. And this is really about immediate, transparent publishing coming online quickly, and as opposed to the traditional model. Let me finish by saying something about partnerships. We need to think more about what sort of partnerships we build. One of the partnerships currently we are building is the one on AMR, tackling the global burden of antimicrobial resistance. It involves Brazil, India, South Africa, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, ourselves, really putting out a call, focusing on a number of things for AMR. Surveillance, for example, is a key one. Biomarkers is a key thing for us as well. How you build data platforms that are integrated and can support all of that is another issue. How you develop technologies for low resource settings is another one. So we actually have put up support for African scientists to bid for this kind of grants to help them on the pathway to doing AMR. And I would also like to take the definition by Kelly that it's not just AMR, it's actually DRIs, disease-resistant infections, drug-resistant infections that we are focusing on. What about collaborations with Cambridge? So I'm here to explore this. I've had my meetings, and we'll continue some conversations. You have world-class facilities, those are very suitable for all kinds of training, support. The support for African diaspora, including those who are based here, so that they can contribute more to Africa. Let's advocate for fair and equitable partnerships. This is critically important, acknowledging the support, the contributions of African scientists and communities. I think the era of so-called helicopter science or safari science or parachute science or whatever it is long gone. So I think collectively we can advocate for fairness and equity in science. We can set the scientific agenda with African scientists collectively, but that agenda needs to be driven by Africa, and then partners need to come on board to support it. And then whenever the project ends, let's make sure we are leaving some capacities behind. And really, the Cambridge Africa team here has been excellent, and I think this can be the umbrella by which we develop other things. We always have a big acknowledgement for our partners who really helped us over the last 3 years to move things forward. But I really want to point out that in addition to, our big funding comes from Wellcome, from DFID, from other global partners, but I also want to acknowledge, for example, the contribution of African governments to the Academy's work. The government of Nigeria was the first African government to give us a contribution of $5 million for our endowment. That was when, yeah. There you go, yeah. Absolutely, there you go. Power to Nigeria. And that was Olusegun Obasanjo's time, and he made that commitment. The government of Kenya, we don't pay any taxes in Kenya. We actually have diplomatic status in Kenya. And when you employ Africans to come and work in Nairobi, they don't pay any taxes. So the government of Kenya has been very generous to us. And we're talking to a number of governments. There is some willingness to contribute, and we will continue to pursue this. So I'm an optimist about Africa. I really am. I like to believe that there is an impetus, there is an acceleration happening, and I know many of you share that optimism. We've moved quickly from this so-called hopeless situation by The Economist headline news 2000. They quickly then came back and did this one around 2013, calling it a hopeful continent. And so collectively, we continue working together. I hope we can actually shape the next headline from The Economist that probably should place Africa as the innovation continent. I truly believe that. I truly believe that. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm really glad to be here. I should have mentioned that the last time I was here, I did not manage to make it to Cambridge, but I managed to make it to the pubs out there. So I'm really glad to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that excellent talk. We have time for one or two questions. I know some people might have to leave, to have children to pick up, but one or two questions before I hand over to Pauline.
It's very interesting. The pictures show the Manchester United logo in the middle about the hopefulness. Anyway, football aside, I'm interested in the aspect of being more African in everything. And that means Francophone or non-English speaking Africa. And I just want you to say a bit more about what you're doing in that respect.
Yeah,
you touched on a little bit of it, but I think I need a bit more.
Yeah, I think well, we've been lucky. When we did the Delta's call, we ended up with 11 networks. 4 of them are in West Africa. Gordon is the only one in an English-speaking West Africa. The other 3 are in Senegal, Mali, and Cote d'Ivoire. So 2 of them are actually focused on malaria, and the third one is focused on One Health out of Bachiru Bonfo's work in Abidjan. And what we are then doing is to really take advantage of that, because these are large networks that involve not just those 3 countries, but a lot of other countries in the region. And then we don't want to have this as a secluded sort of approach. We want them to collaborate with Anglophone Africa. So we are encouraging those collaborations. So they hold their annual consortium meetings every year. They bring together all these young scientists from across the continent, Anglo, Franco, including even some from the Lusophone countries. The other deliberate thing we are doing, as I mentioned, is to give mobility grants, where we're asking researchers to visit from one region to the other region, and we support them for up to 3 months to go and come up with a joint program of work or a proposal that they can submit jointly somewhere else. And so that, again, is a very deliberate way of trying to encourage those collaborations. Now, one of the biggest partners in Francophone Africa is Institute Pasteur. And so Institute Pasteur has, 10 Institute Pasteur centers in Africa. So they are our partner, and with one of our programs on innovation, Grand Challenges Africa, they're actually a partner in that. And the reason we wanted them as a partner is because we wanted to make sure that the opportunities we put out are flagged to all people working in Institute Pasteur. So.
Thank you very much. I think please do find the speakers over a drink in the reception. And I think to close the meeting, I invite Dr. Pauline Esser, who's a fantastic program manager of Cambridge Africa, to give some closing remarks. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience, for coming in from morning and still being here with us this evening. I don't have much to say. You've been here and you've witnessed, you're my witnesses, 10 years of research collaboration with African institutions. So much has happened, there's so much more to do, but we are so pleased and so proud to have every one of you here today. Those who spoke, excellent presentations from Cambridge and from Africa. What more can we say? If only we could replicate that in so many ways across the continent. But as you've heard from many of the speakers, that involves funding to be able to build capacity in individuals, to build infrastructure, and to really mobilize people from within Africa and from the diaspora to go back and help. We do what we can from Cambridge with your support, and we hope that in the next 10 years, you'll continue to work with us to do even more of what we've started here, to ensure that we have mutually beneficial collaboration and that we are strengthening research capacity in Africa. I'd just like to finish off by thanking some key people here. As you know, Cambridge Africa is a team effort. I'm managing the program, but we have an excellent group of people from coordinators through to champions. So I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank all our speakers today, the hassle of getting visas to travel to Cambridge for a one-day program, but you all made it, and we're very thankful for that. To the chairs who've managed these sessions brilliantly, to the volunteers who've come in to help us set up and hopefully will help us pack down, for having the mics going around. We really couldn't have this day without the support of so many of you. Cambridge Africa team, David Dunn, our director, who's been the champion of this program right from 2008 and probably even before that. I came in 2009 to help set it up, but really, he is the brains behind the whole program, and we thank him so much. I call him the father of Africa. To all our coordinators, past, present, those who've come in as temporary coordinators, come in for short periods, long periods, again, 10 years of Cambridge Africa wouldn't happen without you, so thank you very much. Champions for the subject areas. I mean, when I first started, I thought, where am I going to start in this huge university? How do I start opening doors for people to engage with Africa? And the key was to finding brilliant champions across the university who could help open up these subject areas and encourage people to get involved. So Devon, James, every one of you, Melinda, it's been brilliant having you on board, advising and helping to develop the strategy, and we hope that you'll continue to work with us going forward. Cambridge University leadership, again, it's a bottom-up initiative, but we need to have support from the top to be able to operate in this university. So thank you for giving us the opportunity, for funding the scholarships that enable African researchers to come in and do their PhDs here in an alternative method to the capacity building we have in Africa. So thank you very much. Steering group members, advisory board members, the collaborators who open up their labs for researchers to come in, or their research groups in the social sciences and humanities. We couldn't host any Africans here without your encouragement and your support. To have more than 100 African researchers come through these, the walls of these universities is not a small achievement, so thank you very much for your help. The departments, the institutes, Research Operations Office, Sangha, Abraham, NIAB, all the surrounding research institutions outside the university who also open up their doors. We thank you so much. The colleges, again, we try to encourage the colleges to link up for hosting African researchers so they can really get a feel for Cambridge and how research and the collegiate university works. And so we thank you so much for the opportunity to host these fellows in here. Last but not the least, the funding. I mean, it's a huge program, and that involves funding to enable Cambridge people to travel out to Africa and for Africans to come into Cambridge, hosting them in Cambridge for up to 6 months, in some cases up to a year. It's funding intensive. We've had a number of very supportive funders throughout the 10 years for various periods of time, but all of it comes together to make the program work. We've done it for 10 years. We continue to look for support so we can do the next 10 years, and we're counting on you all in whatever way you can help us. Thank you very much for attending, for listening, and we have drinks outside in the foyer for you. Thank you very much.